All right, let's see. Now we're live. Hi, everybody out there. How's it going? One more time, Dr. Curry.
Hey.
Hey. Okay, so let's start again for everybody for that technical difficulty. Hi, everybody. My name is Kathie J, and joining me today, I have the wonderful, 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 amazing Dr. Larry Curry with us. He is a child and family therapist. And you can reach out to him. Yay, we are live, Dr. Curry. Everybody's saying hi. I was gonna say,
Hi.
yes, because earlier when I went live, nobody was commenting, and I'm like, Dr. Curry gets a lot of love, so I know there must be a technical difficulty.
I thought I was losing my popularity. I just,
Not you, my friend.
Okay. Okay.
But you know, Dr. Curry, we've known each other. This is about our 7th year anniversary just passed in January.
Yes.
Yes, and it's just been a wonderful 7 years having you in my life. My children have definitely benefited from having you in my life. But Dr. Curry, you always have a way with just laying it straight and letting everybody know, there's better ways that you can approach certain topics, and there's things that you can do that really can make an impact on your children or yourself. And so I really appreciate your time today talking about Black History Month with me and all of my viewers. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Kathie. I enjoy it.
Yes. Okay. So everybody out there, the first question we started with earlier is today's February's Black History Month, and you were saying that that's like the #1 question you get asked is why's it gotta be February? Why's it gotta be the shortest month of the year? What's going on there? Is there a conspiracy? They're doing it on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, and I honestly I looked at this. I went all the way back to politicians from Texas to let's see, I think it was Carter Wootton, who was one of the first kind of educators, historians, and he goes back to 1950, and I think he got this idea of looking at a month to set aside as Black History Month. And this followed his attending a conference, which I think was around, again, 1915. 1915. And it was around the 13th Amendment. Of course, that was the amendment that gave, Lincoln declared that, slaves were freed, and that led to us celebrating Juneteenth celebration, etc. So, some have said because February is a month of love, this is all about honor and respect, that was kind of the ideal. Yeah, there you go. You got it. That was the ideal month to pick, and it's been recognized all over nationally. Yeah. Yes. I have the right symbol there. My hands look right as I was doing it. Okay. So I think that's one part of it. And we have this whole month to set aside and recognize as Black History Month. But, certainly it's a year-round venture. We can never set one month simply aside and say, here it all is, and let's just do it here. It should be throughout the other 11 months. So 12 months of studying. And it has to do with the lack of equality that we have had in our academia world, as well as just our social world, in recognizing people from the African American community. So I'm really glad that we have it. There's some sad pieces to it, and that is that there's still a gap in history. There's a gap in current history in recognizing a lot of the contributions.
Right. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. So the reason why we have Black History Month is because we need to know all of the contributions that have been made to American history. And there is bad in that. And I don't know if that's what makes white people nervous, as like, why are you trying to shove something down my throat during Black History Month? It's like they feel threatened because there's a month is trying to educate all Americans about the culture, about the issues that your generations have gone through. I mean, it's something that's very important that I think all of us need to know.
Oh, very much so. And, we fear the unknown, those things that we don't know, those things that we don't have some connection with. We look at that as being sometimes threatening. when really the contributions, when you look at Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, and the inventions, great agricultural contributions from the peanut, how many things that were created from that in terms of dyes, in terms of lotions, in terms all of those things. That's great scientific history. And as a child growing up, it wasn't until I actually went to the University of Tuskegee and there's a museum there that says, here's the contributions that were made by these two men. It's like, oh my gosh, I see any of that in my history books back in my hometown where I grew up. So, Black Americans have always had to search out the history. And a lot of that has been carried on through folklores or storytelling, which is very much like the Native American history in terms of you tell these stories and they're passed on from one generation to another. So for years, that's how the contribution and the history has been established. Now we can put it in black and white. We have historians, we have authors, Maya Angelou, we have these great new poets that are coming out. Darwin. I mean, we have a number of people who have great contributions in their writings, in their plays, in their music that says that we're much more than just some of the things that we have been labeled for years and years and years.
Absolutely. So you're most of the time you're saying through the rest of the year, the Black engineers might not be mentioned. So it's important that they get a mention. So we need a month where people are aware and focused on learning where people before us helped us with technology, with cultural differences, there's so much. It's not, yes, we need to know the story of Ruby Bridges, but we also need to know the engineers that were out there, the Katherine Johnsons. We need to know all that.
Exactly. We have right here in Denver, there's the Black Engineers organization, and they're a group of Black engineers that mentor and foster recruiting young kids of color, primarily African Americans, and helping them to get connected with local schools. So Colorado School of Mines, just a number of schools throughout the United States to get them into engineering, things of that area. Well, majority culture doesn't have to worry about that because it's always been in their community and looking out and helping for one another. When 1964, when the integration took place, we didn't have that upper hand to inherit that information. So we had these doors supposedly that were open that were really still closed. So the need for this is more today than it's ever been.
Yes, as a girl, it helps when I see a female that has reached a certain, level of something, whether she's in a magazine, or that I can relate to. So I can only imagine, of course, that helps younger generations to be aware that there were Black Americans that came before them that are very successful at this project, or they did this. It's very important for generations to know that there is no glass ceiling, or that people hit it before them so they can break through it.
Yes. Yeah. And Kathie, the good news is we're seeing more, for instance, female physicians than ever before. But for a long time, that was a rarity. You didn't see that many. So little girls couldn't look and see a physician that was a female, let alone a minority person of color who's a physician. So the lenses have broadened to be able to see that I can go places, I can do things before I never could. Kamala Harris is a representation of a woman of color now in the second highest seat in our history. Yeah, and I think that's just absolutely fantastic for young women of color to say, I can go that far. I can do something like that.
Yeah.
These are exciting times.
Amen. And really crazy times. But I think that's why it's exciting.
Yes.
Change is happening, and it's never easy with change.
Yes, exactly. It's an uphill battle.
Yeah, it is. I wanted to ask you, so there's been a few terms. So is it Black American, African American, people of color? What are the best terms for a white person to use to show that I am being very respectful and want to make sure that I use the right terminology without offending anyone?
Well, it depends on the day that you ask me. and where I am, if I'm in Denver or if I'm in South Carolina. Uh, no, and Kathie, I think the best thing is really about asking people for permission in conversation when you meet people. Do you prefer to be referred to as African American? Do you prefer to be referred to as a person of color? People, they'll tell you whatever. I would prefer my name, but if you want to have to say, for instance, my undergrad degree is in fine art. Okay. So I came along during the 60s, and a lot of my work is reflective of Black art. Okay. But I like to be referred to as an artist, not necessarily a Black artist. If I was white, you wouldn't say he's a white artist.
Right.
You would say he's an artist. So I do Black art. I do Black history. I happen to be a Black artist, but I am Larry Curry first. I happen to be African American. And in our society, what I always say is that my color arrives long before my name or titles. When I walk into a room, whether it's a classroom, a lecture hall, a church, or whatever, people see my color first. And the judgments begin then. Does he know what he's talking about? Is this going to be just another boring conversation? Is this something I can walk away? I mean, that evaluation takes place. Put someone else in that position who's not of color, and that I don't think you have the same kind of questioning that takes place. So as long as we look different, we will have those different assessments, expectations, and evaluations. So I think it's really important. And what I heard this summer from a lot of my persons of color was a lot of empathy being poured out about what they were seeing and what they were witnessing, what they were experiencing, and how can they help. And I appreciated that. I didn't want them to feel like they were responsible, but I wanted them to listen. I wanted them to understand this is something that people like me that look like me wear every day. So, and it's interesting because even within the community, a lot of people struggle with the whole issue of Black Lives Matter. Well, all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter.
Yes.
But the issue at hand was about Black lives and the high number of Black lives that were being lost, being persecuted, being unfairly treated. And that piece, that's where the guilt comes in, that people don't want to look at that. They might try to keep the blinders on and say, I hear that happens, but I don't want to believe that that's really happening out there. So I think we have to be really totally honest and confront ourselves and saying, where do I stand on this issue? Parents need to do it with their children. They need to do it with their spouses. They need to check it out with their friends, their social group that they hang out with. Am I hanging around with people that have these conversations that really should not go public because I think people would think differently of me? Well, you need to look at that because you can't stay in the closet, but for so long.
Right. And how long you want to hold people back? Like, it's to know, I know where I stand, I with equality, but you were absolutely right because, Mary the Greek, she was talking about the fact that her family came over here as immigrants. And they worked 2 jobs. They didn't speak English, but she still feels that they had a benefit because their skin was white over black or African Americans, Black Americans that were here, that knew English, that had the education. She still said they had the treatment over. And that's what you're referring to. It's that fast.
Exactly.
How fast people make.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think what happens is people will say very often, aren't these exciting times that we're living in? You have all these great opportunities. No one knows my history or my track record unless I shared that with them. It wasn't an easy battle. There were many jobs I didn't get because of my skin color. There were many things that I had to qualify for a little bit more than other people that were applying because they were non-color. They got better opportunities. Do I walk around with that and hold that up as a banner or excuse for everything? No, but that's just something that you learn in doing my era of time. That's an expectation. So if you want to excel, you're going to have to study harder. You're going to have to work harder. You're going to have a little more education and training, and you're going to have to somehow go in such a way that you don't intimidate people with the comments that you make. And I've been in many meetings where I've kept my mouth closed because if I say too much, I'm viewed as being kind of a know-it-all. and does someone else my age, whatever, have to worry about that who's of non-color? No, they just say whatever they want to say and they get away with it. So
Right.
there's a dual standard in our society that many people live with and they've learned to adjust to. But to say that this is a fair system, and then see, when you say that, then people say, well, if you don't like it here, go back where you came from. Well, guess what? I came from here.
Amen. Right.
I'm not getting on a boat going back to any place else. I came from here. I'm a 10-year Vietnam veteran. I fought for this country. I got great history behind me, all that kind of stuff. But I'm not going anyplace. I'm going to make the change here.
Amen. Amen. And thank you for your service. Amen. So coming up in the 60s then, and just to hear you, before we get to that comment, but just to hear you say that you have faced struggles hurts my heart, because you are just an amazing man who has helped so many people. And the thought of someone being mean to you without even knowing you just makes me want to hurt somebody. But you know what? That's how I feel with all of my friends that are Black American. They all have a story, and it hurts my heart, and it makes me want to find those people. And isn't there, the statement is, if ignorance is stupid, you're stupid, or ignorance can be fixed, or stupid is stupid, but
something
ignorance,
like that.
Something. It's just like, that's why I'm hoping that we can get through to some people as to, instead of rolling your eyes when you hear it's Black History Month, you go, oh, this is because we need to learn some things, because there's some things that aren't right. And
Exactly.
the more right. And so my other question, so being coming up in the 60s and fighting in Vietnam and stuff, what did you think when the Black Lives Matter movement was happening last summer?
Same story, different day, different stage. It's not like that. It's new in the sense that social media started so much. And this is our new nuance that we have now. And so you don't have to worry about this being filtered on the 6 o'clock or the 10 o'clock news now. 50 people will record something that happened on the street.
Yeah.
And now it's up to the interpretation of the people that just saw that, because at least probably 40 of those recordings are the exact same thing. So now you can't say that, well, that was Fox and that was ABC and that was CBS's way of what. No, we have 40 that show the exact same thing. So that's the breakthrough that we have today, is that social media has really reinforced truth, and you can no longer hide it. It's the same thing with the Capitol. People, well, it really wasn't that bad. We got all this footage, thousands of hours of footage of seeing people break in, taking over, and destroying basically our Constitution. So you can't hide the truth anymore. It's right there for people to see and make their comments. So I think what happened this summer was a buildup of a lot of lives that have been lost, a lot of things, and people get frustrated. We know that most of the riots that have taken place for years, West Coast, New York, Midwest, Chicago, during the summer months, that's the time when people tend to be out. They tend to be a little more verbal, free. And when those things happen, we get these things. Unfortunately, what happens is it takes place within the communities that people live in.
Right.
And those communities suffer by damage and things like that. But, it's kind of hard to sort out frustration, anger when people are going through something like this. Bigotry happens and is real. We used to say in the 60s that the worst bigot was a bigot who didn't know that they were a bigot. Okay?
Yeah.
And so when you look at things like institutional racism, when you look at things, and I'm talking about higher ed education, I'm talking about throughout our judicial system and what have you, this still happens every day. And we need to take our heads out of the sand and stop denying the reality. What I've asked a lot of my non-friends and colleagues of color is that just listen. Listen with an open mind before you judge whether or not you think this is real or not. Just listen with an open mind, because we've been spoon-fed so much misguided information for years that we really don't know what the truth is and what is not.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. The problem is we've reached some sort of normalcy where if someone's trying to have you listen to something that you don't want to hear, it's acceptable for you to just walk away and not want to hear it. And that's
sure.
yeah, and you can just put your little, just go into a little magazine and not hear it, you know, which is, I think, another reason why we need Black History Month. People need to hear the history
Exactly.
of Black Americans that are our neighbors, that are right next to us, that are working next to us. We need to, and it's not, it's, I don't know how to tell people. It's not like it's not a pity party. It's not anything like that. It's education of who we are as Americans. And some of it is
Exactly.
very ugly. And, you
Yes.
know, and yes. And, so I'm just very grateful that you're talking with me. So let's move back really fast to Black History Month,
Okay.
and you were talking about kids. So one of the reasons why I really wanted to get to talk to you is because you're mentioning, you know, I'd like to just be Dr. Larry Curry, but my color hits the audience before I do. How can I help my daughters who are currently colorblind see the issues, to be aware and stay colorblind? Does that make sense? Because I think
Yeah.
they don't see it, but
You know,
technically a time comes where they have to be made aware so that they can be on the right side of it.
yes. Well, whether it's geographical, whether it's when they reach a certain age and they leave this area, they go someplace else, they'll be hit with it in a whole different way. So it needs to begin here. It begins at home. Parents sitting down, having an open conversation with their children, and parents role modeling and saying, you know, we have friends from the general community that are a mixture of people of color, people that look like us, and people that don't. And when the question comes up, and it will happen, whether it comes from school or a friend that says something or uses a word that's derogatory about a particular group of people, that's a teachable moment. And how the parent responds to that is going to set the stage for the future in terms of how that child will handle other people around them and their comments, but also their verbal, stated and unstated opinions about it themselves. So I think what we tend to do is we put the blinders on and we try and pretend it's not going to happen or it's not happening. And the reality is it is happening. And we need to, it's more about being prepared for when it does happen. So have the conversation with the children, I've always said, age appropriate. Don't give them too much, but also don't give them too little.
Okay, so you're saying, so I mean, my daughters are 5 and 7, and we were going to, you know, the things that affected me. To Kill a Mockingbird, it changed my whole world when I read that book in ninth grade. You know, and so I was like, okay, do we watch that? Maybe that's a little too old for them. You know, the Jackie Robinson movie, 42, that's the best movie in the world. Let's watch that. But then N-word is introduced there, and they're young where they haven't had the N-word. A lot of families, the word is there all the time. You know, and so do I introduce that to them? Is that like, what do I stick to age appropriately? You know, what do parents know how to stick to?
Well, I think it's important to have the conversation with them about what the N-word means. And that even within the Black community, there's this ongoing conversation of where it's not okay in slang, in jest, or whatever to use that anymore, because it's pretty hard. And I've seen this happen where a group of kids are using the N-word and it's within their group. But as their group expands, someone who's of non-color is in the group and all of a sudden uses the N-word, and now it's a big taboo. Oh my gosh, you know? It's like, well, wait a minute, guys. We can't have two standards here. If we don't want to use it, let's not use it, period. Just because we look and it looks like us that's being referenced, it's not okay. It's a derogatory term. Let's don't use it. I just watched this the other day. I can't remember the country western singer. He used the word and he got banned from his record company. Yes. And you know, I thought he made a really good comeback. He corrected himself. He wanted to meet with some people to get some further understanding. I mean, I think it's your reaction to it. It happens a lot behind closed doors that we don't know, but when it's out front, we need to be prepared for it and use it as a teachable moment, a learning moment for adults and children.
It is, you know, and in both in white households and Black households, I feel.
Yes.
Yes. because I know, I mean, I was a morning show on a hip hop station for almost 20 years, and I love all of that music, but I'll tell you what, I don't sing that word. Then that word, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
like I know better. And so my rule of thumb has always been, if you're not black, don't say the word, period. I don't care if you're,
Don't say it.
just don't say it. I've seen white people get their clock cleaned because they thought it was okay to say that word. So, but
Yeah.
that was right. So, but in the black community, it was like it turned it into a power moment. But you had a really interesting comment about Richard Pryor, why he stopped using the N word. What
Yes.
was that? Yeah.
I remember that interview, and he went to Africa, and his visit to Africa, when he came back, he said it made such a profound effect upon him that he kind of swore off using the N word. And I don't think in any of his skits he never used it again. And what was interesting for me, well, I thought that was really good because anybody knew Rich. I mean, he was comedian, very funny, very impulsive. He was the black version of the Robin Williams. I kind of looked at it in a way. He was just on the spot. He could do his thing. So very talented. And for him to not only make that statement, but then to live up to that, it happened to me in 2010 when I got to go to Africa for the first time myself, and being downtown Cape Town, and going to one of the museums where the slaves were, put on a boat and sent over to this country. And I just remember the impact it made on me. And I had long before stopped using that word, but I just know how it left me feeling. And visiting some of the communities there and seeing how people lived. And I just came back also touched in such a way that, oh my gosh, my heritage of where I came from in terms of my lineage was never given to me in the academic setting, but going there spoke volumes. So I think it takes experiences like that to really open people's eyes, ears, and their hearts to really understanding. So I encourage us here in this country, if you don't know a person of color, get to know them. Just have a conversation, see how similar we are, also where the differences lie as well. I don't walk around regretting and angry and holding grudges, but I don't forget who I am and where I came from. The minute we do that, we set ourselves up for a big downfall. And that is, I have to realize that my color it's not my handicap, but it is my reality. And we're in a country that does not 100% accept people based upon the way they look. And I should say they do accept them based upon the way they look. And so therefore we reject people based upon the way they look. And so there will be some opportunities, but there will also be some doors that will close. So if you don't get asked to do something or speaking engagement, whatever you say, I wonder if it's because of my color. I wonder if it's because of something else I did. Whereas a person of non-color doesn't have to ask that question. And that's where the whole issue of privilege comes in. Non-color person doesn't have to ask about it. So, well, I guess I didn't get my application in enough time. Or, boy, maybe I should have added another page or whatever. But for the person of color, I had all of the credentials. I had this, I had that, and I still didn't get the job. I wonder if it was because of my color.
You're right. You're right. And so that brings up my next question, white privilege. It's even me saying it, if I don't know if I feel guilt saying it. It's just a weird statement, but you can't not know the history of this of America and not understand what that means.
Right.
It goes against institutionalized racism. It goes against white families getting loans with no money versus black families that had money and couldn't get the loan. Like the come up of generations after generations. If you could, because you are the best child and family therapist out there, you're good at helping people put their lives together, put their families together.
I've hired you as my marketing director.
Please, if you could. White privilege, okay? Like, so I don't. I love you, Dr. Curry. I don't walk around saying white privilege because I feel even when a celebrity does I just want to apologize. I know I've had white privilege. It's like I I get it, but I don't know if they need to be putting it out there more than they need to be helping. And, you know, I don't explain to everyone
Here it
why
is. It is
talking about it.
It is what it is. There's certain places when we're not going through a pandemic that I choose not to go to or walk into because I know based upon how I might be dressed, how I might be perceived. Okay. So I don't want to get into trouble here, but let's just say some of the local malls. Okay. If I'm in my jeans and my sneakers and my sweatshirt and I decide to go into an exclusive store, I can tell if store security or a manager or someone is following me in that store because of the color of my skin. If I am in a particular neighborhood, and you know, in my office, we have an in-home program. So I have therapists that go into neighborhoods all over, and we do therapy with families who have children in the system. And so if I'm in a nice car in a neighborhood, I'm immediately profiled because I'm in that neighborhood and my skin color. Right. If I'm out with my two grandsons and they're biracial, their mother's white, their father's black, and my grandsons were to act out in the grocery store and I discipline them, all eyes are going to be on me. Okay. So white privilege is that you can do those same things I just mentioned and you're not stared upon, you're not stereotyped, you're not identified, you're not picked out, etc. And I think this is the kind of thing, this came from a paper that was written back in the early 70s by Jan McIntosh. Dr. McIntosh was a professor at Wellesley College. And she wrote this paper, Unpacking My Backpack. And she wrote about this long list of 20-some different items of areas that white people of color, primarily African Americans, had to struggle with. One you mentioned about buying a house. And one of the things she said is, I can go into a neighborhood, I can buy a house, any neighborhood that I want if I have money in the bank. A person of color can have money in the bank, cannot buy a house in that neighborhood. HOAs were formed to keep people of color out of certain neighborhoods in the 60s. Okay. I had a chance. Yes. And anybody wants to know more about that, look at the play Raisin in the Sun. Okay. Sidney Poitier playing in that. There's a number of people. And I remember being in that play senior in high school and really getting a picture about that of how neighborhoods were in the Chicago area, New York, also down south, where they would come together and buy the mortgage to prevent families from moving in, to block them from coming in those neighborhoods. I mean, it's a thing. I think the past 3 houses that I lived in, they always had an HOA, and I always had the hair on the back of my head would stand up. Because when I see those little notices from the HOA, it's like, okay, are you doing this to me because I'm a person of color or just what? The real strict rules and what have you. Was a lot of those organizations, when they started out, it was to keep those neighborhoods very exclusive and to block people of color who were moving in.
Which goes to, you're now not in the best schools. The kids aren't, so the come up, there's not a better house that they can leave to their kids or get equity to pull from, to get a car for mom, like the things that white people, they can enjoy houses, it helps them get the American dream a lot faster. And
exactly.
Okay.
In the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, when it was signed, people, I've done some lectures where we've talked about this, and they said, oh my gosh, Dr. Curry, it sounds like you wish that it didn't happen. I said, no, it's the timing. It's the way it happened. We all of a sudden I grew up down south where in Woolworth, I remember we had to sit at a particular counter. I remember the courthouse downtown, the water fountain, one of those enamel type white water fountains. And there was an electric one beside it for cold water. And then this is regular tap water on the other one. And one was white and the other one was colored. I remember the Texaco gas station that had a little sign that says restrooms, which was white, another sign that said colored. And so, I'm 70 years old, but I remember those things. And so when we look at privilege, that's the kind of thing. Today is more covert. It's not overt. We don't outwardly see these things, but they're those discriminative actions that still take place in our society. here's something that's very interesting, Kathie. I've had a conversation with some nonprofit organizations recently, and I'm doing some writing on this to help some business people. And we were just kind of talking about, it's amazing during this time, this past year, 2020 to 21, how so many nonprofit organizations that are run by non-persons of color have been making the statement that, oh my gosh, this is just terrible. And I'm so glad we don't do those things here. And they're the biggest perpetrators of it. In other words, you can't police your own backyard yourself. If you really want to do it, you get an independent group or persons to come in and assess how you hire people, how you treat people, how you operate, how your management style is really inclusive. But it's interesting how many of these organizations, they get the funding, get the money, and they have services that are supposed to be for all people. But when you walk in, you don't see the representation of color employed there or receiving the primary benefits of the services that's supposed to be offered. So it's just fascinating to me to look at this and study some of these organizations and how they operate. And yet they kind of run around with this flag saying, but we don't discriminate against anybody. And it's like, check yourself.
Right,
Somebody else check you.
It's sometimes as easy as look around and see if you're representing what should be, if you say that you're really representing all people of color.
Yes.
You know what I thought was interesting when you were talking about, when you couldn't drink out of this water fountain, you couldn't sit at this part of the diner, you're at this part of the bus, or, like you weren't allowed to do any, this kind of stuff. It's funny because white Americans have a problem putting on a mask.
Yes.
You think they would have tolerated what Black Americans have had to deal with through history of America, and we can't give Black Americans a break and help them out a little? It blows my mind when you say you don't seem like a threat at all. And the fact that you still say you walk in somewhere and people immediately look at you like you would be about to put something under your coat, if is just ridiculous to me. That what it must be hard to maintain your character, to maintain your sanity when something so ignorant is always facing you as a culture.
Sure. Well, you come to accept it. Accepting it doesn't mean that you accept it without objections. It just means that you understand that this is the reality of the world that we're in. And people ask me now, they say, oh my gosh, you have an office here in Denver and you have an office in South Carolina. Why did you go back to South Carolina? It's so prejudiced. Do you know it has been the best? I grew up there until I was 18 and went off to college. And 5 years ago, I bought a home there, and I have some property there and stuff. I have met the friendliest, most open white people in South Carolina. And some that I knew, some that I don't, brand new, who are moving there, some who've lived there all their lives. And what I've said to people is that, if they don't like you there, whether they verbally say it or not, you pick up very quickly from them.
Yeah.
I'd much rather deal with that than to deal with the very covert behavior, very often out of experience here, where people will smile in your face and they treat you another way as soon as you walk away. So and I still love Colorado. I have a business here. My children are here, whatever. But I mean, let's get real. We're not as innocent as we like to claim to think that we are. We're educated, a little more financially established and whatever. But that's where some of the biggest bigotry is. And that's where our children are struggling with, and many of our families are struggling with. You made a comment, Kathie, about the mask. My biggest concern about the mask was, there's a Black man walking into a 7-Eleven with a mask on. And I was more concerned about that. Is that, now, wait a minute. You really do know that this is a covert deal. This is not me coming in to rob. I was more concerned about that than anything else.
You're right. And that's ridiculous that would be your concern. But, I mean, I completely agree, and that's just ridiculous. And it just, so for Black History Month, Dr. Curry, we can do, like, I have my daughter, 7-year-old. I have her homework right here. She learned about Mae Jemison this time. Mae was the first Black woman to go into space. So she learned about that
Yes.
last year. She did her a whole thing on Tiger Woods, him going after the golden bear, or chasing the golden whatever. So as white people, there has to be a day where Black people can walk in a store and not feel like everyone's staring at them. And the only way we do that is to get to know each other more, right? And realize, I mean,
Precisely.
I'm on my knees asking you, what can white people do, or people that aren't Black? What can we do? Because you should see the comments, just people saying, it hurts my heart that there's profiling and racism. Like, drop the knowledge. How can we continue to help to make sure that we erase the ignorance?
And as I said, to be sensitive, to be culturally sensitive. And that means that just because I don't know, I still have an obligation to listen and learn and really understand that the European country, culture, white American culture, we have been saturated with all of our lives. Any book you pick up, I have some stack of magazines here somewhere. Hang on.
No, I don't need any more magazines. I got enough.
I mean, look at the kind of the images. Can you see that? There's a glare there, but I'm just looking at, these are the pretty people of the world that we see. And these are great entertainers. I have nothing against them. I think these are great people. But look at how we see magazines. Until we get way down, we might see, I haven't gotten to a person of color yet. And these are all within the past 30 days. Oh, here's one.
What do we got?
But she's biracial. Remember that, okay?
Yep. Okay, yeah, you got Megan.
We keep going. Hey, AAPR. Hallelujah. There's a face, okay? So, I mean, this is every day of what we see. And I think we just have to keep in mind that when I turn the television on, it promotes blonde, slim bodies, etc. It promotes anything that's attractive with color that is non-black, non-brown. Those are supposedly, now all of a sudden we're seeing a number of interracial couples. And that happened when Obama was in office. It happened a lot this past year. And I think we're seeing kind of a mixture of things. But I think we have to be, when I say to people to be very careful about, just remember that the old days, when you go to the movie, before the movie starts, and they come across the screen with intermission, they showing the popcorn and the Coca-Cola, and you just had a bucket of chicken before you got to the theater, but now all of a sudden you're hungry. That's subliminal messages. And what you see in the news and what you see every day are subliminal messages that drives your values, your beliefs, your interpretation of the world. And so when I say listen, have a conversation with someone, be totally open, be open to let kind of what you're hearing kind of challenge what you believe. Not every person of color is a good person. Not every person of color is a bad person. If you look at the FBI reports and local law enforcement, it will show you crime is very high in all neighborhoods. I mean, you don't go to the Black neighborhood to steal the latest platinum, whatever television. You go to the more expensive neighborhoods. They got insurance. They'll get those things replaced tomorrow, etc. So, I mean, there's a certain amount of logic here you have to think about. And when you keep people deprived of what it is they want to have, they see on television that they think they're entitled to, we're going to always have the have and the have-nots. So talk openly with your children. Be open to look at these things, and don't be afraid to ask questions. I love to tell people and give people answers and comments or whatever. The big thing on the airplanes that I've been noticing, it's been 3 months since I've flown. I've been driving, because the last time I got on an airplane, I won't say what airline, but I felt like the guy beside me was sitting in my lap. We were that close, and I was in business class. But it's just been really scary to see people who feel entitled on an airplane to not wear a mask. And I've now seen 2 people escorted off a plane because they refused to wear a mask. I'm like, if that was me, number one, they cuffed me, they locked me up, and I'd be on the 6 o'clock and the 10 o'clock news, and my whole career would be destroyed. But when you have this entitlement that says you can say and do whatever you want, you tend to be able to get away with this kind of stuff.
How do we fix that? I mean, because you're right, and that's ridiculous. And you can, you can go to All Star Hip Hop, and it is, or All Star, and it is just like white person after white person getting pulled over, being disrespectful to the cops. Like some of them have spit on the cops. One lady kept trying to drive away from the cop. Like it was ridiculous. It is ridiculous. Yeah. So, I mean, how do we get to the point where, I mean, you're not in fear of who the person is? That I wish there was a code word that I can be like, it's cool. We're right here. I'm not going to arrest you. These white people were freaking out. Have a good day, sir. I'm sorry you were bothered. Like I wish. How do we get there? Can we get there? I mean,
I think we can. I believe that an answer is slowly evolving. I think that it's better than it has been in the past, but this past year and a half has been a horrendous year of reflecting and showing a lot of social injustice. I mean, the whole impact of COVID-19 and how it's impacted communities of color. You already have a small population of less than 6%, something like 5.61 or something like that in the Denver metro area of African Americans. And yet they are coming very close to between 40 and 50% of the number of deaths by this disease. So you have a small percentage of people, but the death rate is a lot higher. Is that information? Is it a lack of information? The impact within those lack of services, the lack of connected service, the lack of representation. A cultural component here is that African Americans, many have a distrust with non-people of color. And yet you walk into a clinic and you see very few people that look like you in that clinic. And I heard someone said when they first came out with the vaccinations, they were saying, well, you remember the Tuskegee Institute? Well, that was a different deal. But it's that mindset of fear. Are they going to use us somehow as guinea pigs to experiment with something? Well, this is kind of gone across all races right now, so it's not restricted to one over another. But when you already have a low number in one population compared to the majority culture, it's going to always impact them that much more. We still have work to do to evaluate and to assess and to really be culturally informed, culturally sensitive, updated, and moving progressively in the right directions. There's some great things that are happening in Denver County. There's some great things that are happening in Colorado, but we still have to be concerned. Do we have the focus where it needs to be? I think about rural communities. I think about we still have large Native American reservations here. We have people who are cut off from resources and a voice to be able to get the services. The mental health impact behind COVID-19 has impacted the communities of color far greater than the majority culture, because many of them did not have proper insurance coverage anyhow, and now it's even worse for them.
Right.
So I mean, I was on a committee with that where we looked and we talked about that also. And it's like, well, if you have a managed care program that only allows you so many visits, and it takes you probably that many visits to build up a level of trust, you're doomed before you even start, because it's time to go in to get services. And those services, it's already been used up because you didn't feel comfortable with the person, because they didn't look like you, they didn't make the name or whatever. And now all of a sudden they're saying, well, you used up your 10 sessions and sorry, we can't help you anymore.
And that's the story that happens every day. Like that's the saddest of it. Every day. And so you're talking about this past summer when you attended the 3rd annual Social Work, Mental, and Behavioral Health Conference, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay. And so, So your big takeaway from that was mental. There's a lot of mental issues happening, and I feel, yes, why wouldn't there be? Like, you keep getting shafted. Why wouldn't there be? Like, I mean,
the conference took, and it was done actually last month. was Metro sponsored it, and the School of Social Work there was kind of the spearhead behind it. But it looked at three areas. It looked at the impact of COVID-19 within the African American and the communities of color, which was Hispanic, Latinos as well. It looked at the impact of social justice issues. It looked at the whole dirty issues from the summer. And what we came away with that was that all groups that were represented, the Asian American, Asian Pacific was involved as well. Each of those communities talked about the struggles and what they were seeing people go through. The large number of people who were losing their jobs, who have had blue collar jobs, had labor jobs, and all of a sudden restaurants were closed and whatever. They didn't have the option of a savings account. They didn't have the option of benefits that would carry them for a while. And yet family, you know, they were cut off now. Grandma, who used to be able to take care and babysit the child when mom worked a job and a part-time job, now you can't be around grandma because we don't want to transfer this disease to them or whatever. It's a huge burden that was put upon them. But I think because people of color have always had this uphill battle of fighting adversity, they were probably a little better equipped to handle this in many ways. It's still not out of the woods with this, and the education about it is still taking place. But it's a real situation for us to endure and look at. Again, I think that when I hear people on certain jobs and businesses and whatever, it's like, I wonder that are they really thinking about barrier that many people go through when it comes to getting services, getting help, or even coming forward and requesting help for things that they need. The social justice piece, you can have two kids that are juveniles that commit the exact same crime, but the child whose parents are informed are able to get them a private lawyer, and then the minority child who is not coming from that background, not able to get the same kind of resources, child is in jail a lot longer. So, I mean, when we think about fairness, life is not fair, but let's listen and hear what people's stories are, and it gives you a better appreciation for what people are going through every day.
Amen. And that's that. And I think we can wrap up Black History Month right there. That is exactly right. It's about, you know, it's hard. It's harder to hate someone when you're close to them, when you know them, when you're familiar with them, when you see how hard they work, when you see how much they love their family and what they're trying to do to keep their family safe. And there's no room for holding people down just because of the color of their skin. There's good people and bad people, and the faster that we can get past that bigotry, the better. But you know, it hurts my heart that you would rather have someone be an outright, for lack of better, I won't use that word, an outright horrible person to you than, you know, than the fakeness. And I don't know where it is. I don't know where other than move past the fakeness and get to the niceness, the genuineness.
Yes.
Yes.
Just be real. Be real.
Be real. Dr. Curry, I love you. Thank you so much for your time today. Everybody, Dr. Curry is the best. He is a child and family therapist, and you heard him. He had to get straight A's because he was Black. He had to have the best class because of it. He is the best. The best right here. And Dr. Curry, again, thank you for your service in Vietnam, and the fact that someone who has done so much for our country still can't walk into a store with his grandkids and feel like no one's judging him is a downfall definitely in our country. But you are an amazing man, and I love you. And everyone can find Dr. Curry. You have helped with people with mental issues, to the fighting that won't stop within a marriage, to how is this affecting the kids. You do it all, and you can find him at the currycenterllc.com. And now, because of COVID, anyone in the country that's watching this, you can talk to Dr. Curry. You have sessions, right, where you just do video, correct?
I think I do more on video now than I did in the office.
Isn't that crazy? That is crazy. Well, you know what? I love you, and people, please make an
It's
appointment
amazing.
for him to give us our time. And you know what? I'm going to continue the conversation with my girls, and we're going to watch the Jackie Robinson story. And when the word comes up, we're going to discuss it, and they'll know that you never say it. And when someone says it out loud, you don't let it go. You can't just let that word fly by, you know, unless they're Black and they want to. Dr.
Practice
Curry,
what we preach.
exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, and happy Black History Month. And to everybody out there, continue to learn what you can, not just during Black History Month, but throughout the year, because it's part of our history. Dr. Curry, you're the best. I appreciate you always.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Take care. All right. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for joining us and hanging out for this hour. I hope you learned a little. Pass it along to everybody else that needs a little education this month. All right. Peace out, Dr. Curry. You're my favorite, buddy.
Bye.